So we are going to talk about OTR communication. So I work at Chartbeat. Most of Chartbeat's customers are journalists, and so this is something that our customers really care about and use. This thing is implemented inside of an app called Signal, and so it's it's not exactly relevant to Chartbeat's work, but we are tangentially interested in it since our customers all use it. So I was curious as to how Signal works, so I went and I looked this thing up. You can find the slides down there, bit.ly whispering jellyfish. Okay, so first let's talk about what this thing is actually for. So what does off the record mean? We're going to introduce the sort of standard crypto cast of characters. There's Alice and Bob, who would like to talk to each other. And then there's Eve, who's an eavesdropper. She can hear the communication between Alice and Bob. And in some cases maybe is an adversary, in some cases maybe is sophisticated enough to actually break some of the encryption, but in some cases maybe she's just recording. So let's say that Alice is a reporter, Bob is a whistleblower. He would like to leak some information to Alice, but he would like to do it securely. Alice needs to know who Bob is, but Alice is not going to reveal the identity of Bob. So that's crucial because the only way that Bob is going to feel safe is if Alice ensures that she doesn't actually give him up. So whatever reporting she does, what Bob tells her, she will verify with other sources before she writes the stuff down. So how do they talk to each other? So in the old world, the pre-online world, they would meet in secret somewhere, maybe a dark parking lot somewhere. They would talk. Alice would listen, but not take any notes. And then she would go home and verify everything that Bob said with other sources before actually writing her stuff down. Maybe Eve is lurking in the corner and can hear the conversation. But probably in the common case, there's no Eve. So how do we copy this sort of pattern online? So the way that I, as a young child, was taught to actually do this was with PGP. So PGP is an implementation of public key cryptography. Actual PGP is much more complicated than what I'm describing here. I'm just going to very generically go through public key crypto. So the idea here is that Alice will generate a key pair. So it's two things. They tend to be numbers, P and R. P is public, meaning that she will publish P somewhere. And typically, there's some sort of an online directory that she might publish to, but she may also just hand her P on like a business card or something like that to someone physically, or she might embed her P inside of her email signature, say, and whenever she's communicating in a public online forum, people will see, oh, that is her P, and they will establish an association between that P and her. R is a private key, so this is something that only she knows and she should keep safe. And she will use the combination of these two things to achieve some measure of security with Bob. So she'll take the plain text message, which is M, and encrypt it with a function using the public key. Okay, and the essential property for a public key cryptography is that if you encrypt with the public key, the only way that you can get the plain text message back is if you decrypt with the private key, and vice versa. If you encrypt with the private key, the only way you can get the message back is if you decrypt with the public key. So these two things are like mirrors of each other. Encrypting with one requires decrypting with the other. Okay, does this make sense? Yeah? Okay, cool. So how does this actually work then? Suppose Alice wants to, suppose that Bob wants to send something Alice encrypted, so Eve can't understand what's going on. The way that Bob would do this is that he would look up Alice's public key and then run it through this encryption function and produce the ciphertext and then send that to her. So that might go inside of email. So that's fairly straightforward. Now there's another less straightforward but neat protocol here, which is that Alice can prove in a message who she is. And the way that she does this is she'll take the message and she'll produce a digest, and then she'll encrypt the digest with her private key. Okay, so very quickly, a digest is a short and hard to reverse computation on M. So it's basically the most straightforward digest would be you run your message through, say, SHA-1 function or MD5 or SHA-256, and then you take some number of bits from that computation, and that's your digest. So if the computation is good and is doing what you intended to do, it's very hard to come up with two messages that will create the same digest, two messages that actually make sense that will create the same digest. So she computes the digest, she encrypts it with her private key, right? Now, when you encrypt something with the private key, the only way to decrypt it is with the public key, right? And Bob knows this. So when Bob receives the message, he can decrypt with the public key and then compute the digest of the message himself and verify that, that the digest that someone sent him is actually correct and that that person is probably Alice because she's supposed to be the only person who has the private key. Okay, yeah? All right. So again, so this is how it works. So to get ciphertext, you encrypt the message with the public key, and then to produce a signature, you encrypt the digest with the private key. Now, this only works for people trying to send encrypted stuff to Alice, and for Alice trying to prove who she is. If we want this sort of these sort of guarantees for both ways of communication, then Bob needs to have his own key pair. So it's the same process. To send something securely to Bob, Alice would encrypt using his public key, and if he wanted to prove to Alice who he was, then he would encrypt with his private key. Okay, so some implications of public key encryption. So the key pairs are long-lived, right? So there's this process when you use PGP. They're like these things, like signing parties. You're trying to get a fingerprint of your public key out there. A fingerprint is a digest of the public key out there, and then like it takes a lot of work to establish your identity, and then you really don't want to lose it at that point. So if you're lucky, you create one key pair for a large number, some large chunk of your life, and you don't tend to change it. Now the messages are encrypted, so unless Eve possesses some sort of special math ability, she can't actually see what's inside of the messages. But if she does, right, suppose that the generation of the keys has some sort of a flaw, or Eve works for the NSA, which knows something special about the encryption method that's going on. Eve might be able to infer the key pair I either have from the message. So if the key pair is compromised, right, if Eve learns how to read the message, then that means that she can then read all future messages that were encrypted with that key, and all past messages as well. So if she's been recording conversations, then she can go backwards in time. So that's a problem. And finally, suppose that Eve can't actually break the encryption, but Eve works for the federal authorities and then gets a warrant and goes into the house of Alice and takes her computer and discovers from that what Alice's secret key is. Because supposedly only Alice has a secret key, Eve can now prove whatever messages she eavesdropped on and recorded were actually authored by Alice. So this is actually, I'm not 100% sure about this, but I think this is actually admissible in court as evidence for authorship. Okay, so for the structure of the talk, we'll basically build up the OTR protocol, which is actually how the paper goes. It's a very clear paper. It's a nice read. But I will take a couple of digressions to explain some crypto that the paper just sort of glosses over. And just in case it's not clear, OTR attempts to fix all of the problems with the public key cryptography. Okay, so Alice wants to talk to Bob. Eve is listening. Alice doesn't want Eve to know what she's saying, so we have to encrypt M, right, the thing that Alice is sending to Bob. So how do we do this? Okay, so for encryption, you have to have some sort of a secret key that you're running the encryption on. So OTR starts off with this thing called Diffie-Hellman key exchange. Now this thing is this is absolutely magical. When I first learned about this, I was kind of stunned and I didn't really believe it. So if you haven't seen this before, you're probably not going to believe me. So The form of this actually is, if you like look this up on Wikipedia, what you'll see is not what I'm describing. I've kind of messed with this a little bit, so I think it's a little bit clearer. But but the basic idea is I think correct. So we start with a public seed and a star function. This star operator. And I'm only picking star just because it will visibly be more clear what's going on. The property of the star operator is that it's hard to unmix. So basically, star takes 2 arguments and then produces a value. But if you have the value and one of the arguments, it should be very hard to get the other argument. I won't say exactly what the star function is. That's not in the scope of this talk. So Diffie-Hellman goes through a couple of rounds. So in the first round, both Alice and Bob generate their own private keys. So Alice's key we'll call XA and Bob's key we'll call XB. And they start with an agreed upon seed. And the seed is published publicly somewhere. All right, so Alice then sends seed star XA. So this is the star operator applied to the seed and her private key, and she sends that to Bob. Bob sends seed star XB to Alice, okay? And then Alice takes what she sees from Bob. Okay, so the things that are highlighted in green are kind of, you should view them as basically being opaque messages, right? She's gotten this thing from Bob that corresponds to seed star XB, but she doesn't actually know what the value of XB is because she can't unmix star, right? So she takes that value and then she stars it with her own private key, and Bob takes the value from Alice and stars it with his private key. So again, like what Eve sees is the green thing flying around, right? And even though Eve knows seed, she's unable to determine XA and XB because of the properties of the star operator. Okay, so they both compute these values, right? So on the left-hand side of the equality, there is seed star XB. So this is Alice's computation star XA, right? And then on the right-hand side is Bob's seed star XA, that's what he got from Alice, star his XB. Now, if you notice, if the star operator if the operator commutes, then those two things are actually the same. They're equivalent. Okay, so you just like imagine like on the left side of the equation, if XB and XA swap, then you have the same thing as on the right side. So star commutes, and that's true. So that's what we'll use. That computation is what we'll use for the secret key. So what has happened just now, right, is that Eve and Bob have communicated over a public channel, and they've both agreed on a secret key to use for encryption, but people eavesdropping cannot come up with that key on their own. So this to me is like amazing. Yeah.
This is what powers TLS, right?
This powers some, yeah. There's like a there's like a some sort of like an ephemeral mode or something like that in TLS that's powered by this. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. The most common TLS 2. I think a lot of people are switching over to using this for TLS these days. So.
Yeah. So there's I actually imagine that if you're watching a sci-fi movie and like humans in a spaceship have just encountered some alien spaceship, and the human captain says, "Establish a secure channel with the alien spaceship." Right? I used to think, that's implausible, but actually, no, it's plausible. This, the aliens have invented Diffie-Hellman. There's a great story about how all of this stuff came about. That maybe if there's time at the end, I can tell. There's like an awesome Wired article about this that came out a couple years back. But anyways, okay, so so over a public channel, they've come up with their secret key. Okay, so here's the OTR encryption method. Alice and Bob will run Diffie-Hellman, and they'll come up with their K, and then Alice will send Bob a message, and she'll encrypt it with K. Sorry. So then the question is, how does she encrypt it? So there are these two like broad categories of encryption algorithms: block ciphers and stream ciphers. So block ciphers, they take so they work on blocks of data. They take an n-bit block of plain text, and then they take there's a function then that takes the n-bit block and it maps it to another n-bit block of ciphertext. But the sort of intuitive property there is that the mapping looks nothing like the original. Like it just looks like complete chaos. Now, if you take the original n-bit block and you change one bit, a good block cipher will then result in a ciphertext that looks totally unlike the other version. So a change in one bit should change on average about half of the other bits. Okay. So stream ciphers are probably what you're used to from like the decoder ring that you got in the cereal box or something, right? So the idea with the stream cipher is that rather than just having a key in one function, you have a key stream, right? So this is a seemingly unending sequence of zeros and ones that you then apply to your plain text in zero and ones, and typically you use an XOR operation. So I'll show you exactly how that works. So okay, so let's say that we have the secret key k. So we have some function that creates this key stream. I'm not going to say what the function is. It's not in the scope of this talk. But you just know that it outputs a sequence of zeros and ones that seem random. And it's if you use the same k over and over again, you'll get the same stream, right? So the ciphertext then is a pairwise XORing of those bits, the key stream bits and the plain text bits. So as an example, so let's say that we have a key stream of 0110 110 so on and so forth, and a plain text of 1010 so on and so forth. When you apply an XOR, what you're doing is you're saying, okay, so the bit in the first position we'll do a bitwise XOR there, and then the bit in the second position we'll do a bitwise XOR there. So the key stream 0 XOR the plain text 1 results in 1, and then key stream of 1 XOR the 0 results in 1, and then 1 XOR 1 is 0, and 0 XOR 0 is 0. So that's your ciphertext. So one of the unfortunate things about this kind of a stream cipher is that if you know what the plain text is, you can back out the key stream. And this is just generally true. If you know two of these things, you can back out the third. And so typically the eavesdropper will, she'll know ciphertext, right? But she might be able to guess what the plain text is. She might assume, for instance, that all communications start with hello. Or she might expect, oh, Bob is a government worker who's in this department. It is highly likely he's going to leak this document. So in this message, I will assume that the plain text is this document, say, right? So she might be able to guess this. So if you guess this, you can back out the key stream, right? And if you have the key stream, then you can create a new message with that key stream. So basically, you can forge it. So that seems bad, but in a surprising twist, the OTR authors decide to actually purposely use cipher streams. And the reason is because if they can argue that the message could have been forged by Eve or some adversary, then if Alice and Bob get caught, they can use this as an excuse. Right? They can say, well, no, we didn't send that. Someone forged it, right? Because we're using this terrible encryption scheme. So this property is called repudiable, which is a very hard word for me to say, but I'll try to actually say it correctly. Between Alice and Bob, if only Alice and Bob are involved, like regardless of the encryption scheme, if the authorities bring in Alice and Bob and they show Alice and Bob a message, Alice and Bob can both claim that the other person wrote it, right? And there isn't like a real there's no real proof of the authorship there. So there's a little bit of this property there. But if Eve is eavesdropping and actually recording the messages, then Alice and Bob can say, well, no, obviously Eve forged it, right? Right, so that's nice for Alice and Bob, but then how do they know, oh wait, did Eve actually forge the message? Right, so they have to account for that as well. So we'll talk about that one later. Okay, so what's the OTR protocol so far? So we want to send this encrypted message. We use Diffie-Hellman to come up with the K. We encrypt it with the stream cipher, and then off it goes. All right, perfect forward secrecy. So this is neat. So this is something I actually learned from the paper. I did not know this thing existed. But the idea is, if Eve captures a message and from the message can figure out the secret key, if that secret key is reused, then Eve now has the capability to read all messages in the future, as well as all messages in the past that were encrypted with that secret key. So the obvious thing to do then is for every message, we just change the key, right? The straightforward way of doing this actually is just to run Diffie-Hellman on every single message, but Diffie-Hellman requires 2 rounds, and then the message is a 3rd round of communication on its own. So this is, this is not very optimal. So the OTR authors came up with a very clever scheme where on every message that one party sends to the other, that party calculates a new Diffie-Hellman half and sends it with the message. And so on receipt, Alice and Bob need to keep track of one of the Diffie-Hellman halves that the other person has sent, right? And then use that for the encryption on a response. But then once they're done with that, they can just drop that Diffie-Hellman half. And they should also forget their keys. If they forget their keys, then if like a device is stolen or something like that, like it becomes hard to actually encrypt the old messages. It does no good to change a key all the time if you're just holding onto your keys all the time. So, okay, so how does this this half business work? So as I recall Diffie-Hellman, Alice takes this public seed and then stars it with her private key and produces. I'm just going to call this thing SA just for shorthand notation. And then Bob does the same thing and comes up with SB. And we establish this thing that SB star SA is the same as SA star XB. And that's their secret key. So now the message becomes this. So when Eve sends her first message, I've added some numbers now. So M1 is the first message and K1 is the first secret key. So when she sends her first message, and K1 is derived from the very first key exchange. Right before she sends it, she computes a new XA2, the private key that goes into Diffie-Hellman, and then calculates SA2 and sends that with her message. Now, when Bob receives this, he takes the SA2 and he computes a new secret key for response to Alice. And it's the same thing when he sends it back to Alice, and he'll send his new half. So this way, Bob and Alice can eliminate the extra rounds of communication that have to happen with Diffie-Hellman. Okay, so that's forward secrecy. Okay, but there's a problem, which is okay. What if these parameters do Bob and Alice actually know are real parameters, right? So the SA is a seed starred by some random number that that Alice came up with, but who knows? Maybe Eve came up with the number instead, right? Like maybe Eve is trying to forge something to Bob. So we have to account for this. So this is where a public key comes back into the fold. So we start with Alice and Bob having their own public-private key pairs. So when they first send their Diffie-Hellman halves, they sign those halves, right? So one nice thing. So rather than signing messages, they're signing the partial components of the encryption key. This provides. I don't think the paper really talks about this, but I think the idea of this is that it does provide a little bit of like deniability, I guess, right? Like you can say, well, I didn't really author that message, but I did create the key, right? But anyways, okay, so they sign their halves and they send that to each other. So when they receive the halves and they're both just about to compute K, they go and verify that those halves are actually signed by who they think that they're talking to. So now they trust each other's halves, and sort of transitively, they also trust the K that they've computed. Then they compute MACs on the messages. Okay, so what are MACs? These are message authentication codes. So they're kind of like digests. So the idea is that you take some larger input and you come up with a smaller input that is very hard to forge in any sort of a sensible way. And they typically MACs are implemented with hashing functions. But usually the function signature for a MAC is some message and then some key. So HMAC is a very popular MAC. It uses hashing functions, and just to give you a sense of what the thing looks like. So this K caret OPAD. So the caret is the XOR operation. OPAD is just a magic sequence of bits that some particular, like the popular HMAC function has come up with. So you take the K and then you run the XOR, and then the pipe is a string concatenation function, and then you run the hash function on the K, and you have the IPAD is the inner pad, which is a different sequence of magic bits, and you concatenate that with the message, and then you hash the entire thing. So so these things look kind of like this. So that's what they do. Is they take they go and they compute a MAC on the message payload. And here I'm saying that the message payload is the encrypted message plus the next Diffie-Hellman half that's going out in the message. The green highlights things are the same thing. So I just didn't want to try to fit the whole thing into the slide. Like yeah, like I find that if people actually like are entirely precise, then they start to like try to figure out, oh, is the thing inside of the MAC function actually the thing on the left? Like, was there a typo or something? But anyway, so it's a MAC of the message content with the hash of the key that was used to encrypt the message. Okay, so Bob receives this, and then he can compute the MAC on his own and verify that yes, in fact. For K1, right, that is the MAC of that message. Now he knows that the only person who could have correctly calculated the MAC is the person who knew K1, right? And the message is encrypted by K1. And because K1 was implicitly signed during the first key exchange, he now knows that this message came from Alice, right? Now what's kind of neat is because this message includes the next Diffie-Hellman half, right? Now they know by induction that the next half is also trustworthy because it was MAC'd by a trustworthy key. So it just goes on and on and on. If Alice and Bob are receiving the full sequence of messages, then they are sure on every subsequent message that it came from who they think that it came from. So yeah. So that is the full description of the message payload for OTR. There is one final trick, which is kind of cool, which is this is I think the most clever thing about this protocol is that Alice goes and she publishes the MAC when she knows that Bob has received it, right? So because the key is changing on every message, the MAC is also changing. So verifying the MAC is only good for one message, right? So once she knows that Bob has verified the MAC, right, then what she does is she makes that MAC public, right? And then she can claim that anyone out there could have just invented a bunch of key parameters and a message and created something that had the same matching MAC. Right, so she can, if she gets caught, right, she can say, no, I published this MAC, right? I didn't actually write this message. Someone else forged the thing. Very clever. So.
I have a question about that real quick.
Yep.
Is that just because the MAC, because HMAC has, for example, the magic the iPad and OPAD strings, you can twiddle with those and get any MAC out for any message, basically?
No. The iPad and the OPAD thing is just kind of a trick. You can ignore it. It's there. It's basically fixed for some particular HMAC function, right? And I think OTR just uses like the standard one. So like for all parties involved, right, they use the same iPad OPAD values. The idea with the MAC though is that it varies. So if we go back to the calculation of the MAC, right? So the MAC varies depending on the key in the message, right? So if you hold the message constant and you change the key, then the MAC will change. If you hold the key constant and you change the message, then the MAC will change as well, right? But if you say, I've got some MAC, you can come up with some K and some M that will match that MAC.
That's just purely a throw computers at it problem, I see.
Yeah. You throw enough compute at it and you can come up with something that matches that MAC, right?
Got it.
So by virtue of the fact that it's possible to come up with some K and some M that matches that MAC. Now Eve can claim, no, I didn't actually write this thing even though it matches my MAC. Someone else created this thing, right? Any other questions? Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Why is SA1 not part of the encrypted payload?
That's a good question. I think it doesn't matter, but just in the paper, it's not. I had the same thought, but I'm not smart enough to actually have a real answer for that. So.
Maybe like it allows them to like lose a message and they can sort of resume the stream, I guess. Right.
If they lose a I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think actually in practice, I think that the this is not answering your question at all, but I think in practice the creation of new secret keys is not done on a per message basis, but it's done on a per session basis. So in the Signal app, for instance, I think it runs I don't know when it runs Diffie-Hellman actually. Maybe there's like some, like when you first connect with someone, it runs Diffie-Hellman, but then in an exchange of messages that are somewhat real time, it'll use the same secret key. And then after there's some sort of a pause or break, then it creates a new essay and sends that on. But as to like why it's not inside of the encrypted payload, I don't know. I think maybe it just doesn't matter if it's in the encrypted payload or not. Yeah.
Okay. Is the use of halves just an optimization, or is and also are you actually just getting twice the number of keys by using half the DH?
No, the use of the halves is just an optimization. I mean, like if they wanted to just run Diffie-Hellman on every single new message, they could. It's just it requires 3 rounds of communication. There's another. I think I'm probably going to get this wrong, but I think that there's another reason, which is for Diffie-Hellman to work well, both parties have to be online. For the parties to communicate using the OTR protocol, they don't necessarily have to be online. Like Diffie-Hellman is really awkward if like you have to wait for a couple of hours between rounds, right? So I think I think they're just trying to eliminate like the number of round trips. So if both parties have to be offline and it requires a couple of round trips for a message, it's problematic.
I'm sorry. Diffie-Hellman is actually it's a key exchange, right? Mm-hmm. And the cool thing about Diffie-Hellman is that it allows 2 parties to come up with 2 effective random seeds, exchange those random seeds, and in effect be able to compute the common secret, right? And that common secret then becomes the secret key, which is then used to encrypt the message with, or the plain text of the message with. Diffie-Hellman used to be, years ago, I actually created a crypto product, and it used to take us days to create one Diffie-Hellman key exchange handshake.
Oh, really? What was the slow part of it?
It's just the fact that the computation uses factorization. Uh-huh. And factorization and exponentiation. Factorization is very, very slow. Exponentiation is very fast. Uh-huh. But we actually were using hardware acceleration to do that. Now, with today's crypto accelerators and SSL cards and those types of things, you can do a very fast Diffie-Hellman key exchange. Mm-hmm. It's very compute intensive, but it's typically hardware accelerated. Mm-hmm. So as long as you've got good hardware acceleration, which is now today standard protocol hardware level inside a cell phone, you can do that. So it's not I just wanted to clarify that Diffie-Hellman key exchange doesn't take hours to do. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. But right. Sorry. So the authors bring this up actually at the end of the paper. The point about Diffie-Hellman taking a long time is not due to the computational cost, but the actual transmission medium, right? So if you're trying to apply OTR to, let's say, email, right? So there's like a paragraph about this. If you're trying to apply to email where both parties are not actually in front of their computers at the same time, right? And there's like this round where they have to send the seeds to each other, and they have to wait. Right, that's the awkward thing about it is that they might not get to their email, right? So the authors, this is a good thing to point out actually. So the authors, they implemented this thing really targeting chat clients. Game was their first target, and then a Signal is like a phone app is an obvious target as well. But I think this paper is from 2002, so yeah. They have for email. There's a section in the paper that for email for doing the key exchange, they have a different method that I did not go into, but it doesn't require both parties to be online. So.
I'm not sure whether this is viable or not, but I feel like it would be possible to introduce like a always-on third party, maybe with more keys. Do you see that as something that's realistic as far as speeding up the process?
Always on third. Can you explain that?
Some third-party server that's always online. Maybe the third party has its own key. Its own key that gets verified between the two, and then the two have their own individual one as well. So you'd get some K prime.
Yeah. I think that is possible. I think the fear there would be if the third party is compromised, and that could be an issue, right? Actually, there's one thing I didn't bring up here that I thought was kind of odd about the paper which is that they don't They don't address the possibility of like there being a third party, actually, of Eve being able to not just listen in on conversations, but actually intercept the conversation, right? And perform a man-in-the-middle attack. Because in that case, what can happen is that Eve can intercept the message, and if she's really lucky, she can break the message and get the secret key that was used for the message. And then from that point on, she can forge these Diffie-Hellman halves and send those along. So that kind of attack, I think, I saw a brief mention of it online, and I think that the authors in future versions of OTR, which I think is implemented in Signal, have patched against that attack. But in this paper, I think the attack still exists. Yep.
Sorry, another question. I think there's a race condition here. Like if we both agree on what the key is, and then we both send messages simultaneously, each with new Diffie-Hellman halves, then each party, when they receive a message, they won't know whether this message has the new key or the old key.
Yeah. So the way that the protocol actually works is that both parties keep sequences of their own Diffie-Hellman private keys, and so when they, I'm not going to explain this very well at all, but like when they communicate, when Bob receives, right? I think the way that it works is when Bob receives a message, he doesn't change his key, right? Alice is changing her key, so he recomputes the K that comes from it, but he keeps his same key. So they're never really they're never sharing the same K, except maybe the very first K they probably share, but all the other Ks they don't. They have like their own sort of personal versions of a sequence of Ks. Yeah.
One of the properties that you mentioned that PGP has, or I guess negative properties that PGP has that I think you alluded to that this does not have, is that if you break one of the keys and you're able to sort of decrypt all the messages. And I kind of missed where, if in the situation that you described in the stream cipher, where you're able to infer the key from knowing the message, how is it that you're not able to then replay? Like, let's say that you've been recording all the messages. How is it that you're not able to then replay all the computations and decrypt all the messages?
So the key stream for the encryption is a function of just the key that was used for that one message, right? And so that changes every time, right? So it's not the same key stream for every message. It's a different key stream for every message. So just because you break one doesn't mean that you can break the others. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
Quick question. If we have two parties and then we are trying to circumvent an adversary or some third party, what if you make the identity of the recipient an actual function of the seed itself, so that the decryption part has to rely solely on the identity of the recipient? Like there's a unique identifier for each party in this, right?
Right. This starts off with the assumption that both of the parties have their own private keys. Yeah.
So if you make if you make the intended recipient, if they're a unique identifier, if you make that part of the generative function of the actual encryption, like the seed and the encryption, wouldn't that eliminate the possibility of an intermediary?
Yeah. I'm not totally sure I understand. I mean, so the way that that public key cryptography does work is that there is some identifier for a party that is publicly known, right? Mm-hmm. And so the encryption is a function of that identifier. But the fear is that someone who's listening in on the conversation might be able to take the message and infer what the private part of that identifier is. That's the fear with the public key cryptography. And once they've inferred the private part, then they've inferred then they can break all messages.
So we are assuming that the intermediary can also access the unique identifier of one of the parties?
We're assuming that the intermediary can possibly
Oh, okay.
break one of the messages, right? What we are not assuming is that the intermediary can break every single message, because then, like, what's the point in the encryption if they can break every message, right? So we're saying, yeah, they might get lucky and break one. So we want to limit what they can do having broken just one message.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Any other questions? I think I just have one more slide, which is just a review. But, yeah. Must amplify silly.
Yeah, no, everybody had these really great questions, so I had to have a silly question. Was this what was the last slide before this?
That one?
Oh, yeah. Wait a minute. So it's very clever that Alice publishes the MAC after Bob has acknowledged receipt. So where does she publish that? Is that like Reddit? Is there a subreddit for that or something? I mean, where do I
Probably,
get that?
right? Like, doesn't everything end up on Reddit? She tweets it at Donald Trump.
Any public forum would work, right? As long as
Right.
it's published in some
Yeah.
way, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure whoever implements the
more
protocol
public, the
probably
better,
handle it.
right? Yeah.
So you said this paper was from 2002, roughly?
I think so, yes.
Was this developed in response to people using PGP and some of the things like that, and having the problem of once someone knows to attack you, it's a lot easier to get your key because they're the government or some organization?
Yeah.
Or was this like cryptographers playing with like, we can do better than what we've done before?
I think, I'm not totally sure about this. I don't think this is in the paper, but I think I read this elsewhere, that it was actually a real world problem that was posed the researchers. Someone suggested that there are these practical problems with PGP, and then they decided to come up with something that can beat it, yeah. And they argue in the paper, they don't go to extreme lengths to argue this, but they claim that actually for the vast majority of communication, you really don't want PGP. That actually PGP should be used in very specialized cases, and this should be the standard thing. But yeah. All right. Well, I think. I'm sorry. What cases where you actually want to use PGP? I think the authorship there is. I mean, okay. So if you purposely want your conversation to always be public, right? So let's say that you are writing an operating system kernel, right? And you want to establish to everyone that, hey, you are the person who is responsible for doing all this, right? Like in that case, it totally makes sense, right? You would want to be able to sign the code that you put up online, and you also want to be able to associate emails that you're posting in a public forum with that code as well. So there you do want to use PGP. But like most conversations are private, right? Like in the real world. Keep imagining.
Okay. I imagine there are conversations that need to be secure. For example, a bank sending you your statement where repudiability is not a feature you want.
Right. You don't want the bank to plausibly deny that you actually had that money in your account, right?
Or the bank could say, like, oh, somebody else sent you the statement.
Yeah. Yeah, no, good point. Yep. Yep. Yep.
So would it be fair to say that the OTR protocol is something you'd want to use for like short message sequences or sessions, whereas the idea behind PGP is that it's intended to be for much larger payload type messaging?
Yeah.
This is something that's more optimal for like mobile messaging, short burst messaging, where you're trying to establish authentication between the two parties and then secrecy between the two parties, but the ability then to selectively repudiate if you needed to.
Yeah, I think it's less about like necessarily the size of the data and more the intended use of the medium, right? So when you're on mobile and you're texting people, like you don't really care if your messages persists, and you probably care more that people aren't able to recover your messages. You in like the like Snapchat world, right? Like you want your stuff to go away, right? But in other contexts, you want the authorship or the security of something to be like much more longer lasting, right? So my sense is like it's less of the technical capabilities of like the mobile device and more of like the mode of operation that you're in when you're using a mobile device, right?
Let's hit that last slide and then open up for more general questions.
The last slide is all the properties that we went over. So perfect forward secrecy, cool signature, so that's cool. Max, cool. Malleable encryption. Oh, I didn't actually say this, but that's a stream cipher thing where you can actually forge stuff, and repudiability. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Nope, leave it on because I think we have any more general questions about the talk. I think there were some people who had other stuff.
Anyone?
Say again?
Yeah.
All right, the actual algorithm.
This is just, are we recording? This is actually not totally correct. it's close enough though. It's easier to understand this than it is. Like the paper is like very formal and precise about things, but yeah.
Do not implement based on this slide.
Right,
Read the paper if you're going to implement.
No, but the font I use is Source Code Pro, so it's got to be real, right? Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? Up front, Zishan will come forward for that.
Yeah, so I had a question. You mentioned in the beginning that you think encrypted conversations could be admissible for court hearings and such. So back to imagining, like, I was just wondering if anybody knows of a case in which that happened. Like, 'cause I'm trying to imagine like how that would come about.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I'm not sure. Yeah.
It is a thing with the FBI that they will take over they will find who they suspect to be a criminal and then find some evidence that gets them to basically allow them to take the place. So Silk Road, usually child pornography, they sit on the opposite end and basically, they're not men in the middling in the sense that one side is basically taken over by them. They're not pretending that they know the keys and watching this happen. I don't know if there's been a case where they've bothered to be the man in the middle and actually tried to crack the keys, because it is so much easier to, if you can find some identity for one side, to basically take over that person and then use that to incriminate the other side.
But like an Eve has never actually appeared in court and gone, oh, I found this encrypted conversation and here it is, and this.
I don't think the NSA likes to appear in court. They just prefer to, send the black men over and take you out. Correct. Men in black. That is a very important distinction. I did not mean it that way.
In black helicopters. We're going full paranoid here. Men in black and black helicopters coming for you. Any other questions? Oh, we got one behind you, Zishan.
Yeah, you mentioned like a cool story in the beginning.
Oh, the cool story about Diffie-Hellman. So, Diffie and Hellman. So I don't know where Diffie was at the time, but Hellman was a professor at Stanford, I believe. They came up with this scheme. I want to say something like 1977, like in the. In 1975, and then shortly after that, RSA came out. So it came out recently. I want to say like maybe the last 5 years. That it turns out that British intelligence, the GCHQ, had come up with the same techniques a couple of years before Diffie-Hellman. I'm sorry. In 1969, okay, so quite a bit before. And the story there is that there was an employee of GCHQ's, this guy, I forget his first name, his last name is Ellis, who received some sort of an assignment that was kind of a throwaway assignment. Like they were thinking about, like at the time, people knew encryption on secret keys very well, but the protocol was you would meet physically somewhere to exchange a secret key or a list of secret keys, right, and then use that for future communication. So the problem that Ellis was posed was, do you actually have to meet in person to do this? And his story is that he went to bed at night once, and then suddenly had a flash of insight and came up with an existence proof that it would be possible to exchange a key over a public channel, but he didn't know how it was actually done, and he was actually not a mathematician, so he didn't trust his own abilities. So he proposed the idea to, so first he wrote the thing up, he wrote his existence proof up, gave it to the head GCHQ mathematician, and the guy was like, unfortunately, I can't find anything that's wrong with this, but it sounds crazy. Then they floated it around, and a couple of the mathematicians there couldn't figure it out. And then what happened was a guy by the name of, his last name is Cox, I believe. Dropped out of a PhD program and went to work for GCHQ. And part of the deal there is that he was assigned a mentor. And the mentor just in passing mentioned this problem of trying to exchange a secret across a public channel. And this guy was like, oh, I'll go and, he had a number theory background. He's like, okay, I'll go and I'll go and work briefly on this. So he worked briefly on it and he figured it out. But he had not read the paper that Ellis had written, and he said that if he had read Ellis's paper, he probably would not have figured it out. He would have gone into it with some preconceived notions. So anyway, so he figured this thing out. They developed something that looked a lot like Diffie-Hellman. They also came up with RSA. But they couldn't publish any of it, of course, because it was all classified. They couldn't patent it. They tried to, Ellis, I think it was Ellis who made the argument that they should patent public key cryptography, but if the GCHQ goes and patents it, then they have to reveal the fact that public key cryptography exists, and no one knew that at the time, so that was a problem for them. So anyway, so they did all of this. I think this stuff became declassified just recently, which is why we actually know about it now. But Diffie through other sources knew sometime in the 80s that GCHQ had came up with this before him. But he couldn't just come out and say it. But he just by chance happened to get to have a visit with Ellis. And so they went out for lunch. They talked about various things, and then at the very end, Diffie turns to Ellis and says something like, "So how is it that you came up with public key cryptography?" And of course, this wasn't declassified at the time, so Ellis couldn't really say anything. His only response was, "Well, you Americans figured out how to do more with it than we did." So that was that.
If you want to know more about that, there's a book, Crypto by Stephen Levy, I think, that dramatizes it but glosses over the math, that recounts the same set of stories.
Like me. just like my talk.
Any other questions? We got one more in front of you. Go ahead.
I just wanted to confirm, is SA2 the second half of SA1, which they signed with initially?
SA2 is for the next message that Alice sends out, she generates a new private key for Diffie-Hellman, and then she uses a star operator with the C to get SA2. Yeah, it's a new one. But the fact that it was included in the previous message that was signed by the trusted key, that implicates the new key as also being trusted, right? Yeah. Oh, one more thing to add to that Diffie-Hellman story is that I wasn't able to verify this, but there were rumors that Diffie-Hellman were in some meeting with someone who is sort of related to the GCHQ work, and that they got a hint of a notion that it might be possible to do something like this, and then they went and solved it. But I don't know if that one is true or not.
Since came out so long ago, are there any reliable, good implementations of it that?
For OTR, I think basically just Signal. Though, yeah, I don't know. Does anyone know of anything else that uses this? Yeah.
I don't.
Does WhatsApp
know
use OTR?
WhatsApp may use it. I saw another hand in the back just yelled out.
Oh, okay. That's the one that's based on game. Is that right? Or-
Silly question. I've noticed all cryptography papers use Alice and Bob as names. Is that from the story that you were telling me, or is that just?
No, that's, I mean, yeah, it's like all the names are named after, so there's Alice, Bob, Charlie, E for eavesdropper, yeah, they're
It's a convention that all
Yeah.
cryptography uses.
yeah.
I think the next one is Charlie.
Yeah, I think it's Charlie. What's D? Who's D? Dexter? I don't know.
No, it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't really matter. Like, it's literally just a convention. But
Yeah.
any other questions? Was anyone else? Zishan's making the wrap it up statement, or international sign for wrap it up. So
I don't know,
any other
or
questions?
his hand is numb. Maybe
We can
he's just-
continue. We can continue these conversations at the bar afterwards. If anyone wants to, trek through the heat, that kind of thing.
Just to wrap up on your WhatsApp, the same person who wrote Signal actually helped WhatsApp port the Signal protocol, the axolotl ratchet or whatever it is, to Signal. The key exchange is done slightly differently, but the cryptography is the same.
There you go.
Cool.
All right. Thank you so much, Wes. Thank all of you for coming.